Hey, this is Lee Nevis, host of CJ and Cell. Thanks for listening to the following podcast on Public House Media.
This is Madeline, host of Crowned and Dangerous here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come back to check out my show, Crowned and Dangerous, where Jessica and I talk about our time in the pageant world. A new show comes out bi-weekly on Thursdays. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Crowned and Dangerous. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hello and welcome to your Soccer Passport World Cup edition here on Public House Media. I'm Brice. He's Yvonne Sanchez Carrasco. The World Cup is done and over with. The ticker tape parade is there. The final awards have been given. And now that things have truly settled down, I think it's a good opportunity for us to really kind of take a last look back at the World Cup this year. There's a lot of storylines, a lot of international storylines that we didn't really get a chance to talk about, as well as some big surprises and big upsets. And I think this is a great time for us to kind of reflectively look back on the World Cup as a whole. Yvonne, for you, what was one thing that kind of stuck out to you about this year's World Cup that was the main storyline this year?
Oh, probably the biggest storyline had to be just our women's national team in general and the attention they gathered negatively and positively. There was always a story going on with them regardless. And I think some of it was fair, some of it was not fair. For example, it's been a couple weeks. I'm still not a fan of the celebrating 10, 11, 12, 13th goals on Thailand. I thought after that, the celebration against England was fantastic. It was funny. It was witty by Alex Morgan. That got blown out of proportion. There was always something going on with this team, and we talked about this, how they kind of turned that into the focus of themselves and really were able to thrive off of it.
I think so too. There's an odd New England Patriots style aspect to all this, where you kind of embrace the role of the villain. And it sets things up for a different way of providing extra information. When you look at all this kind of stuff and you look at what the women's team has done, people were not going to like them because they've been on top and they've been consistently on top. People in the United States haven't liked them for different aspects of things. It's just there's a large amount of numbers that are popping out about whether or not you like this women's team or not. But I mean, all things put together, I think this has been a good season of the year of the Americans getting their first back-to-back wins. Only the second team ever to win back-to-back Women's World Cups at the Women's World Cup. Let's kind of shift things around because, I mean, it's easy for us as Americans to talk about that, but internationally, what was the biggest storyline?
I thought, from an outside perspective, there's a lot of good storylines. I really liked these young teams like Spain playing really well. That did have good showing. The Netherlands and what kind of they've done over the last 4 years, what they've done with this World Cup cycle in being European champions in 2017. They made their first last World Cup in 2015, and for them to make it to the finals, I think it shows what these teams can accomplish when there's structure, when there's plan, and when there's a willingness to invest in these programs. So I thought you saw that with the Netherlands making it to the finals. You saw it with Spain playing really well in that knockout stage all the way in the round 16. And you saw that with Sweden as well with their consistency. And when there's a large map out plan of what these next 4 years, what you hope to accomplish, and the steps it takes to accomplish those goals little by little, you see rewards. You see the rewards and the fruits of those labors coming out.
Well, Vaughn, you're a naturally positive guy, and I'm not. So I'm gonna take a different approach to this. I think the use of VAR with goalkeeping is probably the biggest storyline, because even though that there's a lot of positives there, and the future of the sport I think is in a good way, for all the reasons you described. Man, does FIFA have a way of really kind of finding any single possibility of screwing things up, especially when dealing with the women's game. We saw in Canada with all the synthetic turf issues. We've seen this World Cup with all the VAR causing problems with goals. We've seen it screw over Jamaica and Scotland and Argentina and Japan and so on and so on and so on. And it is absolutely frustrating to me right now when you think about how in our last episode we had to talk about consistent to the game versus consistent to the rest of the officiating throughout the tournament. When you think about how the rule was actually kind of pushed a little bit before the very start, but really wasn't applied in any friendlies or anything, about using VAR to call the goalkeepers off the line like that. I think it had way too many changes in how these teams competed, and I think it definitely separated the we're just happy to be here compared to we're not going to really try to go back because we got screwed over so badly. And I think it's a good way to really kind of stunt the growth of a lot of these smaller nations that are just now getting on equal footing. Not necessarily very rich countries to begin with, that have to go to a certain standard to be competitive in the men's game, just to even provide equal opportunities. There's still a lot of growth in these nations, and they all got screwed by VAR in one way or the other, especially when you think about the Caribbean and South American nations. So I would probably say that that's the number one big issue in terms of internationally, where, if you don't have a horse in the race, I would probably say that would be the big one.
I mean, I think people in general still aren't convinced in VAR to begin with, but let's remember, VAR has only been around for about 2 years. And when you think about instant replay in other sports, it takes time to figure out exactly what you're doing, even though now you have this thing. It's not going to be right away. It's not going to be, the NFL's had it for over a decade now, and they still can't figure it out at times. So it's going to be a process of what is going to be the way that it should work properly. And that happens in any sport when it comes to adding technology and adding instant replay to anything. And you see it in basketball, you see it in football as well, and you're seeing it in soccer too.
Yeah, I just wish they'd stop using the Women's World Cup as their testing ground for a lot of this kind of stuff. Nothing says that it's a secondary product like treating it like a minor league. And so that's kind of a big one for me. Let's talk about surprise teams. What two teams do you think really kind of surprised you this year, both in a surprise in a good way and surprised you in a bad way?
Yeah, so in a good way, Italy was one of the nice surprises. I thought they were in a very tough group. While starting in Brazil, they won the group. They were really consistent. They're very tough to beat. So it was astonishing for the fact they haven't even made a Women's World Cup in 5 editions, and they make it to the quarterfinals. So I was very pleased with that. Another team I would say that was a surprise would be Sweden. I think when we talked about the higher echelon teams, Sweden probably was in like the layer, the next step below that. They probably weren't entering the tournament. We saw them as one of the top 5 teams, but they were probably in that 6 to 10 range, and they played it really nicely all the way to make it to third. So that was a great surprise. Disappointment so those are my positive surprises. How about you?
Positive surprises, I think I'm going to go with Brazil. I wasn't really bullish on Brazil to begin with. I thought that with Marta being kind of a one-trick horse down there, that Brazil was going to struggle, and they actually exceeded in a lot of ways that I thought really kind of showed that Brazil was ready to play. They really survived in that group of death aspect where all 3 of them. And that is a big aspect, I think, in terms of surprising me at least. And so I would say Brazil is a big surprise. I think Argentina playing as well as they did was also a surprise. And so I might kind of just lump this into all of South America. Because when you think about Chile, Chile struggled in a lot of ways because they don't have the forwards. But what they did well, really did well. I mean, what they did against the United States I thought was absolutely amazing. That all came from the goaltender, who's the best in the world. And then they created opportunities, even though they really didn't have the firepower to do so against Thailand. They just didn't get enough in goal differential to really kind of upset the ship enough to get one of those third-place spots. I thought Argentina fighting back the way that they did against Scotland and getting a draw against Japan was huge in its own right too, finishing third in that group and also being one of the teams left on the outside in, looking in for that stage. I thought was really good. So I would probably say the positive surprise to me was definitely the South American teams. I thought they were really good.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. They were a nice surprise because I think we both weren't very high on South America entering this World Cup, and all three of them did very, very well, I thought, for what the expectations were for them.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even have Argentina beating Panama in the playoff game to get in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for Argentina to go out there and get a scoreless draw with Japan, I thought was very impressive. And that's something, too, that I think is ultimately going to help out a lot of ways, is that if you get the South American continent to really start pushing women's soccer the way that they push men's soccer, then you're going to get a real big influx in terms of the popularity of the women's game quickly.
How about disappointment?
Scotland. I was really high on Scotland. I thought Scotland kind of got screwed over on a couple of those games. They never seemed to break out of their shell. And I think they kind of got in their own ways in a lot of ways. This is only the second time they were in their tournament, but I had them moving on because of the third place aspect. I thought they'd be able to get a couple of draws or something in there, get out with 4 points kind of deal, and they didn't. Canada, I think, has to be up there too. I think we all kind of thought that Canada would be a lot more solid than that. And it was kind of sad to see the window officially close on the Canadians and their hopes of a major title. With how good that they've been over the last decade or so, they're definitely on their way out. I feel like they got a couple of young guns. They're not going to be terrible. They're not going to be at a threat of losing missing out on the World Cup altogether. But they are. I think they're time for a title, and lifting up the cup itself is gone. And that window's closed. So that's a little sad and disappointing to me too.
One of my disappointments is Germany, because I thought they were more than a quarterfinalist team, and especially the way the bracket worked out for them. I thought it was there for them to make it to the finals at the very least, but then you watched them play, and they played with a great idea. You knew what they wanted to do, but they kind of just lacked that quickness of making it happen, and it cut to them against Sweden. But yeah, they never looked like they made it completely out of third gear. They never really seemed to really hit you never saw them play like at their highest level, I thought, which you did see with some of these other teams at different times. And with Germany, it always seemed like they're playing just well enough, playing well, but just like well enough without being extraordinarily fantastic, and looking like a threat to win the World Cup after the group stage. And so, yeah, a little disappointing for them, the quarterfinals. And then New Zealand, I thought, was disappointing, losing all three games and not really creating anything, only scoring one goal. And yeah, so New Zealand was the other disappointment for me.
I think those are good answers. I mean, there's lots of feelings to be had about this one, and so I guess for me, what are your overall feelings on this World Cup? Was it successful? Could it have been better? Like, what are your final thoughts on the 2019 World Cup?
So I thought it was successful in the right steps forward with seeing other countries continue to improve. I think I'm still not sold on 24 teams for the World Cup for this edition, just because I still think there's too much of a gap. But I don't know, if you keep it with 24, you allow more teams in there, get more experience. You will get a little more surprises, especially when you add those third place finishes, because it's 24 teams. So I can see why it was popular that way. But yeah, I think there's continue to be improvement from what you saw 4 years ago, what you saw, 16 years ago to where they are now. I think there's a continued improvement on the overall product and the overall effort that does get put in to make this edition of the World Cup a continued improvement. So it was a success, I think, and I think it does help them too that the U.S. does do well, because when they do well, I think that's more eyes. That's in general, more people are watching just because they are. And so yeah, when you have the best team or the most popular team or the most polarizing team continue to play, it helps it helps everything else, because then you get people who don't watch women's soccer, watch soccer in general consistently. Now they're involved. Now they're a little bit more involved as it goes on. There's more storylines. So just in general, I think it really did help them that the U.S. did so well and got so far. So those are kind of been of course, there's things that they need to improve on. There's always things that need to improve on, but you see that with every tournament, you see that with every World Cup. There's always things that can be improved, especially when there are so many people trying to take the cookie from the jar and kind of help their own, the corruption that's still in soccer in general. So it's never going to be perfect.
It's never going to be perfect, but I think there's still positives there that are showing the growth. I think, 24 is a growing pain stage right now for the Women's World Cup, because you wouldn't have had Scotland, you wouldn't have had Italy, you wouldn't have had Spain, you wouldn't have, there were teams that I thought deserved to be there that would not have been there if you didn't expand the field, because it allowed a larger European pool, as well as a larger North American pool, which gave Jamaica a chance to get out for the first time. And when you think about expanding the good pools, the Oceanic pool, the North American pool, and the European pool, it gives an opportunity for a couple of extra teams from Asia and Africa and South America to still make the tournament. And I think that's really where the growth is. I think that the African continent is probably the best in terms of growing to a lot of this stuff right now. I think that they have a lot of smaller nations that are now starting to compete in that the African qualifiers are getting more and more competitive, shows a big growth. I mean, yes, Nigeria has typically been like the top dog in the African nations, but they've still at the exact same time gotten out every time, but they've struggled when they got there. So I mean, at least the parity is up in some of these nations now when you think about the World Cup qualifying and what that means. And so I think that's a positive aspect for that. Ultimately, it's reserved success. I mean, we're still going to keep talking about this for a while. I think there was a lot of people that were proud of the U.S. winning. I think there was a lot of people proud of how their teams did. I think that there's still a lot of debate that's going to happen in terms of equal pay. There's a lot of economic trolling that's going on right now that's kind of misidentifying libertarian principles for the equal pay aspects, because they have absolutely no idea how the soccer federations work or the Women's World Cup underneath FIFA works as a whole, and the international economic policies in play compared to the fight for equal pay in the U.S. or Norway, or opportunities and stuff like that for other nations. So it's adding up, and it's creating an opportunity for a lot of people to talk about things, and I'm hoping that at least with this podcast and stuff like that, we've had the opportunity to educate and kind of go from there, which I think is something that, because we went late on time on the last one, we got to splice these together. Why don't we just skip the last break and kind of go straight into this, Yvonne? last show for us, buddy.
I know it's been a good ride, good year as well. Very grateful for Public House Media, for Baxter, who I've known through the media circle a little bit, and he gave us opportunity. Very thankful for you and everything you've taught me more from like the behind the scenes aspect on how to do a show. So in general, just very grateful for everybody who helped make part of this. All the guys like Zach and Luis and all of them as well who were with us at the beginning too. So nothing but gratitude for me about this.
You know, Matt Pocket also joined us on the show a couple of times. Mark Serber was there at the beginning with us, as well as Baxter, Adrian, and Vic, who have done stuff for the Public House Media side. They've done a lot of things in post-production work and marketing for the show that I think has really helped in a lot of ways. And I think we ended it strongly, but I know I live on Eastern time zone, you're on Western time zone. I mean, it was a nice odd couple aspect in terms of more formal journalist and true star player like yourself, but I think the odd couple aspects just ran us too far into the ground. Plus, we also have lots of changes coming up. I mean, this is one of about a half dozen major life changes that's happening all within a month, and so one job ends, a job in my field begins. I'm moving. The other show that I have with a different network got bought out and now is being syndicated on other things, and I have to record the rest of that show actually once I'm done with this, and so it's it adds up after a while, and for all the shows on Public House Media, whether it's the sports ones and what Chris Heimdall has done, and or some of the other shows that have really kind of stepped up. I've been very happy and blessed and appreciative of what Baxter and everybody at Public House Media, from host to editor to social media person, has done, and it's been good. It's been a good run. I also do want to bring up too that we had the opportunity of ending this a little bit earlier, and we decided to make sure that we stayed through the end of the Women's World Cup with extra shows, so that way we could at least try to cover the Women's World Cup with the same tenacity that we did the Men's World Cup when the show started, which made it a very, very clear-cut beginning to ends, aspect of it all. And, I was really happy that we were able to do that.
Yeah, and then, they did. We were asked if we wanted to extend, and we thought this would be a nice way to end as we both continue to work on new projects or grow our continued projects as well. So for that, I'm very thankful for them as well at Public House Media for having the trust in us to want us to continue. But we thought this would be a perfect way to end it for this tournament specifically. And as we continue to branch out on new things and grow other things as well.
That being said, we'll just drop this very casually. Depending on how the other sports shows go, you may hear us occasionally stop on in again and talk to some of the other guys on the cheap seats or press row or something like that. And I actually did Beauties and Headcanons one time because I talked about the economic impacts of Ant-Man and the Wasp. So you never know. You might hear us on one of the other shows. This is a very good ending, I think, on all fronts. So this is a great opportunity to make sure that we continue along and do what's best and make sure that we're giving back to Public House Media. Even though that we're not a regular, we're still fans, and we'll be happy about that.
That is completely correct. Yep. Everything's ending on a good note with everybody at Public House Media, and again, nothing but gratitude and thanks and smiles from my part.
Is there a final shout out?
Well, yeah, my shout outs to you, man. Thanks for a great year, for everything you've taught me. You've been you've been fantastic in helping me learn more about what it takes to actually record and work on a show like this. So for that, I'm very thankful. And again, shout outs to Baxter, Andrea, and everybody at Public House Media.
I promised a friend of mine that I would do this. My final shout out is as a throwback to the original radio show that I had when I was in college, to John Schuster's Civ of the Century. Just because you won a medal at the last Olympics in curling for the U.S. doesn't excuse all those years of failure and futility. So I promised that I would give a shout out to a Civ of the Week. But also, Yvonne, much love to you. You've taught me a lot about soccer too, because I've always struggled in terms of understanding individual player awareness and stuff like that. I've always gotten the concepts, but in terms of scouting a player, evaluating a player's skill set, that was something that I was lacking, and you taught me a lot about that through this process. So you're not the only one that learned a lot, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, buddy.
On that note, I think we've hit all our thank yous, except for you, the fans that have listened to this show throughout the last year. We want to thank you for what you've done in terms of keeping us on the air, and we hope that your lives are just as fruitful and important and positive as ours are going right now. Thank you so much.
Yep, thanks to all the listeners. Thank you.
He's Yvonne Sanchez Carrasco. I'm Brice Burge. For the final time, this has been Your Soccer Passport, World Cup edition, or any other edition, here on Public House Media.